begin with breaking news from Niger, where a group of soldiers claim to have overthrown the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum. They've declared the closure of Niger's borders and imposed a nationwide curfew. Ferdia Carr begins our coverage.
Detained by the men meant to protect him, Niger's presidential guard surrounded Mohamed Bazoum's residence early on Wednesday. Amid the uncertainty, supporters of the president came out to protest.
No one knows what's going on. We all woke up this morning and heard that someone had decided to take the president hostage and try to make him resign. It's impossible. Everyone has come out to show their discontent.
Soldiers fired in the air, sending protesters running. There was apparent hope from the presidency and the West African bloc ECOWAS that a solution could be mediated. Hours later, in a broadcast on national television, military officers announced the removal of President Mohamed Bazoum.
We, the Security Defense Forces, gathered at the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, have decided to put an end to the regime you know. This follows the continuous deterioration of the security situation and poor social and economic management. We affirm our support to all commitments undertaken by Niger.
ECOWAS, the African Union and the United States have demanded President Bazoum's release.
I spoke with President Bazoum earlier this morning and made clear that the United States resolutely supports him as the democratically elected president of Niger. We call for his immediate release. We condemn any effort to seize power by force.
Frustrations around unrest and armed rebellions in the Sahel region have been a driving force for coups there. Niger's neighbours, Mali and Burkina Faso, have seen 4 military takeovers since 2020. Western forces, especially France and the United States, have since increasingly relied on Niger as a base of operations against armed groups in the Sahel. They'll hope to see Niger remain a democracy, along with Mohamed Bazoum's supporters, who voted him into power just 2 years ago. Ferdia Carr, Al Jazeera.
Ahmed Idris says there were several signs of trouble for Mohamed Bazoum since he came to power.
Bazoum had his work cut out for him from day one. He was an influential member of the last administration. He campaigned vigorously and won the election in 2021. But again, in 2021, the danger signs started showing. Bazoum is coming from a minority Arab tribe in Niger, and then taking power away from an established tribe that dominated the military, the civil service, and the business was a very, very difficult thing for people. And so there were several indications that this may not end well for him, and it may not end well for his government, running its full course. And we started seeing this probably since 2021, when Mohamed Yusuf was still in power. That was the time Bazoum was elected and he was declared president, and there was opposition against him. People were thinking that there will certainly be a coup one way or the other, but he lasted 2 years, actually. So he faced challenges. He inherited the Boko Haram insurgency, the worsening situation on the border with Mali and Burkina Faso. So those were critical issues that define what the coup leaders were saying in their statement this evening, saying that Bazoum has failed to rein in the security challenges in Niger and also the economic challenges facing the people in that country. But again, if you look at Niger, you understand that this is a poor country that has been struggling for decades in terms of the economy, in terms of security, in terms of even feeding the ordinary person on the street. Niger has faced several environmental challenges, climate challenges, and is still facing them. And people are curious to know how the military will solve those problems they are accusing Bazoum of failing to solve.
West Africa's main regional and economic bloc, ECOWAS, had earlier said that the president of Benin is heading to Niger on a mediation mission. The UN, the African Union and the US have called for the immediate release of President Bazoum. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke a few minutes ago about the political crisis unfolding in Niger.
We are very closely monitoring the situation and developments in Niger. I spoke with President Bazoum earlier this morning and made clear that the United States resolutely supports him as the democratically elected president of Niger. We call for his immediate release. We condemn any effort to seize power by force. We're actively engaged with the Niger government, but also with partners in the region and around the world. We'll continue to do so until the situation is resolved appropriately and peacefully.
Mike Hanna reports now from Washington, D.C.
The White House, the State Department, and indeed the Pentagon have been closely monitoring the situation. There's deep concern in the United States about the situation in Niger. It is described as a critical partner of the United States. Now, there are some 1,000 U.S. forces stationed in that country, some of them special forces units who've been training the Nigerian military, but there's also a massive drone base in the north of the country which is used to police the movement of militants allied to Boko Haram or Al-Qaeda. So great concern within the United States, also the awareness of what happened in Niger's neighbors. Their military coups in Mali and Burkina Faso resulted in an invitation to Russian-backed forces to come into the country. This is something that the U.S. would not like to see in Niger, which is regarded as its last standing ally in the region. Now, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, held a telephone conversation with President Bazoum during the course of the day. He's in Wellington, New Zealand. He says that he offered his unwavering support to the Nigerian president. However, what form the support will take in the days and weeks ahead is unclear. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Washington.
West Africa has seen a series of military takeovers and attempted coups in recent years. In August 2020, the Malian army ousted President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta after a wave of anti-government protests. 3 years later, the military is still in power. In September 2021, the soldiers in neighbouring Guinea overthrew President Alpha Condé. It followed a disputed election in which he had been vying for a controversial third term. In Burkina Faso, 2 coups took place in a matter of months in 2022. Army Captain Ibrahim Traoré is currently in control there. And also last year in Guinea-Bissau, 11 people were killed in a failed coup in February. Let's bring in Cameron Hudson now. He's an analyst on African peace, security and governance issues. He's also former Director of African Affairs at the National Security Council at the White House. He joins us from Durham, North Carolina. Welcome to the programme. So, still a developing situation here, but nonetheless, how worried will the US administration be over what's happening?
Well, I think they're going to be very concerned. As you mentioned before, there's over 1,000 U.S. military personnel in Niger right now conducting counterterrorism operations as well as training the Nigerian military. We have 2 drone bases operating there, which surveil the entire Sahel region. But more importantly than that, I think it was the last remaining democratic state in the entire region. You mentioned the number of coups d'etats that had taken place in the last few years in neighboring states. We've seen Secretary Blinken, the very first Secretary of State ever to travel to Niger, did so only 3 months ago, promised more than $150 million in humanitarian assistance and political support. And so I think there's a real question that Washington has to be asking itself right now. If after all of this money and attention and engagement and assistance, if we cannot keep Niger on a democratic path, then what are we doing wrong?
We've seen recent military upheavals in neighbouring countries, haven't we? To what extent have insurgencies like ISIL in the region fuelled military discontent?
Well, I think we can't rule out the fact that, it was the military that carried out this coup and that they have been on the front lines of combating these terrorist elements that have been spreading across the Sahel region. Now, Niger was not the most worrisome case. It was not the most beset by that terrorist threat. Burkina and Mali have seen far greater death tolls and civilian casualties related to those conflicts. But nonetheless, I think there was a certain degree of discontentment within the military. Clearly, there's been some speculation that perhaps they haven't been receiving the training that they want or the supplies and the material that have been promised to them. It's hard to say exactly what their grievances are. They've been been very murky about it, just saying that it's the political situation, the socioeconomic situation, and the security situation in the country that caused them to carry out this coup. So that's not a lot to go on, given that it's everything.
The US says it gives unwavering support to Mohamed Bazoum, but in practical terms, how far will that support go?
Well, again, I think we've seen Washington trying to rally support not only from itself, but we've seen the neighboring states coming in, Benin and Nigeria intervening with a mediation effort. We don't know how far that's going to go. We've seen the African Union and ECOWAS, the regional organization, condemning this coup. So there has been, I think, much more rallying around the Nigerian president than we saw perhaps in Burkina Faso or Mali, where military coups came after other military coups. Bazoum was a kind of bright spot in this region. He was a democratically elected president. He had embraced, Western alliances. He had traveled to France, to Washington multiple times since being elected, had exchanged visits with these leaders, and so was really seen as the last Sahelian leader in the Western camp. I think for him to fall and to be removed, I think poses all kinds of questions for this alliance of how we can strengthen and continue to engage Sahelian states going forward.
Cameron Hudson, we very much appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thanks.